You and I are weaned, as was Tom Hanks in his wonderful new movie on Gary Powers and the Cold War and all that. We were weaned on a relationship coming out of 1947, coming out of 1952 and 55. It's always been there. You say that alliance, that transatlantic alliance, is at risk. Why is it?
Right. I mean, I think that we've never seen the relationship between the United States and Europe, the most important and foundational alliance for the world's economic system, so weak since the end of World War II. The United States increasingly unilateral in the way we think about our interests around the world and the way we project them, and the Europeans going their own way, not only as Europe, but individually. You just look at the relationship between Britain and China, established on the basis of economics. They want to be their best friend in the world. Or Germany and Turkey, because the Germans, Merkel, concerned that they have to do something to respond to the lack of refugee support they're getting, or reaching out to them politically. Or the French and the Russians reaching out because the Russians are doing more than the United States or anyone else militarily in Syria, and that's what they're most concerned about, given their own Muslim population and the terrorism they've experienced. This is not a relationship that we've seen, and it's so critical to maintain stability not only for global markets but also for the hotspots that we're looking at. We're talking at the top of the hour, and yet when you have a 2016 presidential election, which is increasingly about foreign policy because everyone knows it's going badly, this relationship is not being discussed on in one debate, precisely because it's not really there.
Well, would you say it's partially due to economic necessity, though, Ian? Because Europe has so many problems internally of its own, and it trades with itself most of all.
Look, there's no question that if you're Europe today, if you're Britain today, and you see that there's one country in the world that's writing big checks, and it's not the United States. They were writing the big checks after World War II. Today, it's China. $3.5 trillion, and the Brits will tell you very directly, look, we want a piece of that. We've got big infrastructure needs. They're not going to pay for themselves, so we got to ask the Chinese for support. You look in the Middle East today, it's not the Americans and the Europeans that are actually playing the big economic role. The Chinese are the ones that need the energy increasingly, and the Chinese are the ones that are writing the checks. So, the world is not being driven by the Americans and the Europeans, certainly not being driven by them together, and that creates an enormous amount of conflict.
Francine, I know you want to jump in here. I do want to notice, Francine, about 15 minutes ago, Bahrain severing ties with Iran as well, joining Saudi Arabia as well. I just noticed that across the Bloomberg.
Yeah, which is important because, of course, they're from two different factions, Bahrain and Saudi. But if I go back to what Ian was talking about and focus on Brexit for just 1 second, what is the chance of an accident, Ian, that actually leads to Brexit?
Look, I think that Brexit is a larger likelihood than most consider. In part, it's because you have on the left in Britain now a Labour Party that has basically taken itself out of relevance, which means the backbenchers in your Conservative Party are more likely to express the views, their Eurosceptic views, since they don't need to be loyal to Prime Minister Cameron. So it's going to be harder for him to get his own party together. But also, you really need support from Angela Merkel. And if there's one thing we've been able to count on for the last 8 years since the financial crisis, it's been a strong Merkel as the leader of not just Germany but Europe.
Is she now?
She was Person of the Year from Time Magazine.
Yeah, but come on,
that was last year.
I mean, that was last year. I
think that's the last year she could have gotten it. I think in even the fourth quarter she was already eroding quite a bit. This year, Merkel's not as credible.
But Ian,
this year, Merkel's domestic problems.
Because she's distracted.
Yes,
right, she's distracted by not only domestic problems, but also by Schengen tensions, right? You hear today from Sweden's decision to start imposing these official border checks. The very foundation of Europe is now at risk for 2016.
That's exactly right. And she's taken an incredibly unpopular position in the notion that we will accept as many refugees as you can handle. We'll take 1 million a year. Well, I mean, if there's one thing that Saudi Arabia versus Iran tells you, it's that you're going to see a lot more refugees coming to Europe right now, irrespective of what Merkel would like to work out with the Turks. That's going to undermine her, and the Brits need Germany to be strong and focused to ensure that the Brexit risk is as limited as possible.
You have a killer chart in your report on the populism of Europe. I was thunderstruck in France. It's 27.6% or something for Le Pen. and the National Front. Is that polarity growing this year, or will it temper?
No, it'll grow. And again, let's keep in mind, it's the highest that the National Front's ever received in a vote, but they weren't able to pick up a single regional seat because the center-left...
So is it real? Perfect.
It is real, and it's real precisely because they can't win, but they can affect the politics in all of these countries. They're an enormous distraction. They can polarize what were center parties, because, look, in the same way in the United States, the Tea Party stopped a lot from getting done. You know, if you're a center-right running for the French presidency in 2017, you better take a lot of those votes. They're going to do that. They're going to play that.
Ian Bremmer with us on Eurasia Risks for 2016.